Thank you so much for joining us here on day 3. I was a little nervous up until recently. I know there was donuts downstairs, so I'm really happy to see that the room filled up, so welcome. Today we are going to be talking about animal law, education, innovations, impacts, and opportunities. I will be introducing our panelists here in a minute, but I know that we have a room full of talent from the US and around the world, so we'd like to leave a little bit of time at the end of this panel to open up the floor so people can give updates about what they're working on if you'd like to. So it's something to give some thought to as we get going. So a little bit of an introduction. With more than 160 ABA-accredited law schools now offering a course on the subject, the study of animal law is no longer considered fringe or a niche field. So where do we go from here? This panel will explore innovations and opportunities in animal law education, as well as talking about intersectionality issues, expanding degree options to non-attorneys, integrating DEI initiatives into the classroom, and outreach to other professionals. That said, and although animal law may no longer be considered a fringe field, new discoveries and innovations that begin in the classroom can create positive impacts for animals in the real world. So I would like to go ahead and introduce our panelists here. First up, we have Matthew Liebman, who is the Associate Professor and Chair of the Justice for Animals program at the University of San Francisco School of Law. Before coming to USF, Matthew practiced law for 12 years with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where I had the pleasure of working with him. He also, of those 3 years, he was the director of our litigation program. Matthew's article, Animal Plaintiffs, is forthcoming in the Minnesota Law Review. His scholarship has also appeared in Ecology Law Quarterly, the Animal Law Review, the Journal of Animal Law, as well as the Stanford Environmental Law Journal. He is a co-author of A Worldwide View of Animal Law. Matthew's current scholarly focus is on the ethical challenges of representing animal clients. Matthew graduated from Stanford Law School and the University of Texas. He clerked for the Honorable Warren J. Ferguson of the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Welcome, Matthew. Next up, we have Megan Senatori. I will tell you a little bit about Megan. She is the Associate Director at the Center for Animal Law Studies, or CALS, as we like to call it, at Lewis and Clark Law School, where she helps us achieve its organizational mission to educate the next generation of animal law advocates and advance animal protection through the law. She is an integral member of our leadership team with a focus on key goals, priorities, and innovations to support and facilitate the growth of our organization. Prior to joining CALS in 2019, Megan was a litigator in private practice for almost 20 years. During that time, she was honored with the Animal Law Achievement Award by the Animal Legal Defense Fund and her pro bono animal law protection work for her pro bono animal protection work. Megan has 13 years of experience teaching animal law, including at the University of Wisconsin Law School, Marquette University Law School, and now Lewis and Clark Law School. And with that, welcome, Megan. Everyone hear me okay? All right, on the move here. Well, good morning. I have a stack full of questions. So like I said, we will save some time for any of you who want to share your updates, but also we'll spend 15 minutes at the end with a Q&A for anyone who may have questions either in person or online. So let's start talking about the background, and if you could each share a little bit about what classes you have taught in the past, as well as what you currently teach. And why don't we start with you, Matthew?
Sure. So I teach 2 animal law classes at the University of San Francisco. One is a basic doctrinal animal law course, cruelty code, courts, federal statutes, things like that. I also teach a seminar called Animals and Justice, which is a bit more theoretical and philosophical, looks at kind of the concept of justice, who's entitled to it, and how animal liberation intersects with human liberation. And then I also teach professional responsibility, which is not an animal law class, but I try to work some animal law issues into it as we go.
Thank you for that. Megan, how about you?
Yeah.
Could you share with us what you're teaching and what you've taught in the past?
You bet. So I taught the first animal law course at the University of Wisconsin Law School back in 2003, I believe. I co-taught the course with Miss Pamela Hart. And then I taught the first animal law course at Marquette University Law School in 2004, I believe it was. And I taught, those were both animal law fundamentals courses, and I taught those courses for 10 years. And then since joining CALS in 2019, I teach companion animal law, which is, as you might imagine, with a focus on the animals who we regard as our companions. I also teach a course in animal law trial advocacy, drawing from my litigation experience. As Pam said, I was a litigator for about 20 years. So I teach that course, and I will also be teaching a course in emerging topics in animal law. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit today.
Thank you both. Now, my next question, and I'll start with you, Matthew. Did you go into law school knowing that you wanted to be a professor?
No, I went to law school to not be a professor. My undergrad studies were in philosophy with focus on animal ethics. So I was really interested in, long story about how I arrived there, but very interested in our ethical treatment of animals. I took a philosophy course that really just sort of started me thinking on those issues. So I graduated with a degree in philosophy and was thinking about going to graduate school and becoming a philosophy professor, and decided that I could make more of a tangible difference on behalf of animals as an attorney working to change the laws that govern animals rather than as a philosopher. I still don't know if that's the right calculus. I think there's a lot of philosophers that have done really amazing things for the animal rights movement, but that was my choice. I decided that I would rather get a little more hands-on and alleviating animal suffering. So I went to law school very much with the intent of being a practitioner, and I did, graduated from law school and went to the Animal Legal Defense Fund and spent 12 years there as a litigator doing animal protection cases. And when in about, I guess, 2019, the University of San Francisco got a generous anonymous donation to endow a program in animal law. And I was invited to apply. I was in the Bay Area doing animal rights work, and decided it was too interesting of an opportunity not to put in an application. I was happy doing litigation and working with some really amazing, fantastic colleagues doing lawsuits of all kinds against animal abusers of every stripe. But this was really too interesting not to at least put in an application, and actually got the offer and did a lot of soul searching about whether, doing practical litigation was where I wanted to be, or if being in a classroom and working with students and holding space for kind of the deep thinking of scholarship was what I wanted to do. And I decided that it was just too great of an opportunity to pass up. So I took the job at USF. It's my path to becoming a law professor.
Thank you for sharing your path. Now, here's the next question. Was there anything that you, now that we're here on this, sitting here on this stage, that you would have done differently throughout that path to get you to where you are today?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the best professors are ones who have some practical experience, ones who have kind of know what, how to file a case, how to litigate a case, how to take a deposition. It just makes the teaching so much more real. I have some students here. I think they like when I say I litigated this case, that it gives it a little more gravitas. I can sort of talk about it, talk about my co-counsel in some of these cases and some of the strategy, of course, without waiving confidentiality. But yeah, I think it makes it more real. So I'm glad I did spend some time in practice, and it gives you, I think, a nice perspective on what's possible through litigation and what might take other paths. So I don't think I regret anything. I do wish I had paid a little bit more attention in law school, not only substantively, but also to just the craft of teaching, because it is, you can know something, but it's not the same as being able to teach it. And I had some really amazing professors in law school, and I wish I had paid a little bit more attention to just how they were imparting the wisdom that they imparted.
That's a great answer. And my next question was going to be for the people in the room who are contemplating teaching at some level. Do you have any advice for them other than pay attention in law school?
I think there's a lot of different paths to becoming a law professor. And it really depends on sort of, there's really, I think, at least two ways of being a law professor. One is kind of the path that I find myself on now, which is being like a tenure track professor at a law school, which has its own kind of pathway. Or if you just want to be someone who teaches animal law, being an adjunct. And I think there's very different pathways to those ways of being in a classroom. And happy to elaborate a little more, or just sort of, generally speaking, I think, having a passion for not only the substance of the work, but how you convey it and how you situate it. Really.
Thank you. Now, Megan, you had a little bit of a different path, as I mentioned at the opening remarks, that you were in private practice for 20 years. And I know you spent a lot of your time carving out pro bono animal law work, and known as the expert and the Midwest for that, and really took the lead on that. Can you give insights or advice to people who are maybe considering that path, or who have already identified that they want to be an adjunct professor?
Yeah, that was my path, was as an adjunct professor, and I taught throughout the time I was in private practice. There was a small gap that I didn't, and when I wasn't teaching animal law, I taught a seminar course in negotiations at University of Wisconsin Law School. So my biggest recommendation is to become an adjunct is, first of all, to recognize the value that adjuncts bring. I think a lot of times people feel like they need to be a professor in a true sense to make a difference. And I can't tell you the practical experience that adjuncts bring into the classrooms is so important. I've been on the side of, being an adjunct and also being part of the hiring team for adjuncts now at CALS. And I see some of our adjuncts in the room. I think David Rosengard was here before. I think I saw Paul Locke. And that practical experience that you bring into the classroom is just so important to learning. So first, I guess, to recognize the value of it. I would say the second piece, and I'm curious, do I have anybody out here who is interested in being an adjunct professor? Raise your hand. Yeah. Ask. When I taught for the first time as an adjunct professor, I was a year out of law school. And it was intimidating to think of what do I have to bring to the table? I've been out of law school for a day. But you prepare yourself, demonstrate you're an expert in the field and for animal law, put together a plan. You have less convincing you need to do now about what is animal law and why should it be offered in the law school. Back when we were doing it, and I think Pam will talk about this a little bit later, we had to first explain what animal law was, try to convince people that it was a thing. But prepare yourself. How would you teach it? What would your syllabus look like? There's so many resources out there now. And also ally yourself with someone wherever you want to teach who is already teaching there in a different subject matter, who can vouch for you. So those would be kind of my recommendations, and to carve time for it. And it's fun. I really have loved. I loved teaching and practicing, because I could, even if the hearing I had that day didn't have something specifically to do with animal law, I could come into the classroom and talk about an experience I had with a judge that kind of sheds light on what kind of attitudes you might experience when you take an argument and then you try to actually take an academic argument or thought and then translate it into a courtroom in front of real people is a very different thing. So that's some ideas for ways to get there and how to do it.
Thank you for that. And if I could just add, as Megan mentioned, we co-taught the first class together. So we built up our expertise as much as you could in law school. We didn't have a class or a chapter at the time, but we found ways to get credits while we were in law school. We started a nonprofit for credit with a public interest professor who, no matter how many times we told her, please don't call us this, we do more than this, they referred to us as the horse people.
We had nothing
to do with horses, but we rolled with that. But one thing that I thought was really helpful for us when we first taught was we found a mentor who was already part of the faculty. And that really gave the administration peace of mind that we weren't just coming in a year or two after law school and teaching a course. We had that internal support. So that made a big difference as well. So thank you. So moving on to the animal law curriculum. While the law is constantly evolving, law school education is often criticized for not diverging much from the traditional ways or the roots. Think of the Socratic method, the ways we're taught in the law school. What are your thoughts on the traditional methods, and what are your own approaches to teaching animal law? And Megan, why don't I start with you, since you talked about that merger between private practice and teaching?
I think the traditional methods have value at a point in time in law school. So like the first year, learning how to think like a lawyer and how to deliver arguments and how to break things down, I think has value. For me, I was not a fan of law school after that because I wanted to learn how to practice. So I sort of truncated my law school experience, and I did it in 2.5 years because I wanted to go out and actually do the thing I was in school to do. And that was my own approach because I wasn't feeling like I was getting enough practical opportunities when I was in law school. Now, I graduated in December of 2021, so it was a long time ago. And I think as a profession, we now understand, and law schools are really focused on the importance of practical experience. So like I can say at Lewis and Clark, it's a huge focus for us. We try to offer as many experiential opportunities as we can. One is our farmed animal protection project, which allows students to have individualized projects that are focused on advocacy for farmed animals in their own kind of way and spirit that they want to do it. Professor Mead leads that up, and that's a really cool opportunity for experiential learning. Another one is we have 2 different clinics for international wildlife law. We have a JD clinic, and we have a clinic for our international LLM students. And in those classes, they're working on actual cases. We'll talk a little bit more about our Global Law Alliance later, but they're working on actual cases and projects that our Global Law Alliance is doing. So for example, they worked on trying to stop an oil and gas drilling project in the Okavango Delta. They worked on wildlife trafficking legislation in Peru. There was a recent Pele petition. I believe the clinic also worked on that relating to the protection of pangolins. So clinical opportunity is huge. And then just bringing it into the classroom. I know that Professor Tischler always takes the students, and I think Professor Frosch does too, for animal law fundamentals to the zoo. And they apply the Animal Welfare Act as they're there to kind of look around and see how it works in practice. That's the kind of stuff we can bring into the classroom. I know they also go to the Oregon Humane Society. And then just beyond that, in the regular classroom, by bringing in guest speakers who can talk about their practical experience. My own preference is I love to bring in actual cases or to do hypotheticals where students think about taking an argument and how they would actually present it and convince someone that it's a worthy argument that might prevail in court or in a legislature or wherever it is. So those are some ways that I think we can, bring practical experience into animal law or all education and still value some of the traditional roots of law school, which has its purpose to a point.
Thank you, Megan. Would you like to add anything to that question?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the way I teach is somewhat traditional. I mean, I do use the Socratic method. I think there's value to it to people. One, it makes students show up prepared. And 2, I think it does democratize the classroom. I think if you're just pulling from the same volunteers, you tend to hear the same voices. And I think there's a lot of students who are either just from introversion or from social exclusion, not confident enough to put their voice forward or to volunteer it, but when they are invited to contribute, make really meaningful contributions. So I do use the Socratic method. I think the case method is helpful to a point. I think it's less helpful in animal law than a lot of other spaces because case law only develops when the thing has been litigated, and there's so much that's unlitigated. So we actually do a lot of supplemental like statutory work in my classes. Not in terms of like prepping legislation, but you can't just read a couple of cases on the ESA and know how the ESA works, or read Jones versus Butts and understand the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. So I think sort of pulling in some of those supplemental methods beyond the case method is really helpful to just see kind of what the law is. I do think there's an over-reliance on appellate decisions as the heart of the law in law school when so much law is statutes and regulations and what trial court judges are doing. So yeah, I think pulling in those to supplement the case method is helpful. And then we don't have a clinic. At USF, we do have a lot of focus on experiential opportunities for students through other coursework, so I don't feel as much burden to do it in animal law, but I do try to pull in a lot of sort of primary documents that will look at complaints. I know when I was in law school, like I read 100 appellate decisions before I ever saw what a complaint looked like. You know, we also will, you know, try to hunt down regulatory documents. For example, we just covered captive wildlife in my animal law class. So we looked at the USDA reading room and how to find inspection reports for facilities, talk about, you know, why an organization might have brought this case. So pulling in a bit more of the kind of strategic impact litigation thinking as well.
Thank you both. So as we all know, this field is ever evolving and it can evolve pretty quickly, a lot of new developments. How do you stay abreast of these new developments and ensure that your students are coming out with the best education possible?
Well, I mean, staying up to date, I think, is the responsibility of all law professors, right? I mean, law is constantly evolving. And so whatever you're teaching, you need to be aware of what the developments are. It's as true for my professional responsibility class as it is for my animal law classes. But, you know, animal law is probably developing more rapidly, and just being part of the community and knowing what's happening, I think, is really important. I will put in a plug for the Brooks Animal Law Digest, which is sort of how I make sure nothing slips through the cracks in terms of federal regulations or statutes or major court decisions. But yeah, I'm constantly updating the syllabus to add new things. We had to cover National Pork Producers Council versus Ross, which I didn't teach. I taught it last year when it was briefed and argued. It was argued the day we had class. This year we had the decision, so we had to work our way through that. So, you know, it's constantly evolving, and I think the syllabus needs to do the same.
Great. And in that same vein, I imagine, and I know that it's important that we continue to develop new and current curriculum and courses. So Megan, do you want to talk a little bit about the development at the Center for Animal Law Studies, but also, as I said at the beginning, we would love to open up the floor when we get closer to the Q&A and hear about what everybody else is doing as well.
Yeah. And I just want to echo, I feel like my mic just went off, maybe not. Want to echo what Matthew said about staying abreast of the law too. There's just bringing in the news and what's going on actually in the world into the classroom is such a helpful way to keep students engaged and stay on top of it. But in terms of emerging areas of law, we had a great example with my colleague Raj Reddy, who I see with us today. We have an emerging topics series of courses, and Raj has developed a course in insect law. So for those of you who were at that panel this morning, such an engaging, like fresh approach to consider a whole category of beings that as a movement we haven't really thought of. I'm a huge fan of it because I like to save bugs. In my family, they call me Bugga Teresa because I like to catch bugs in boxes and release them. So the emerging topics course in insect law is one example. Another is I'm developing a course right now in veterinary animal law. So to try to bridge that gap between lawyers and veterinarians. And when I was in private practice, I worked with a lot of veterinarians. I worked with them on regulatory matters and record keeping and informed consent, reporting animal cruelty, you know, that kind of stuff. And so I'm trying to, in the course, kind of help lawyers understand more about the veterinary profession and veterinarians understand more about animal law, because we seem to have all of this collaboration and common areas that we can work together on, but somehow we're not always successful in doing that. And veterinarians really shape so much policy with animal law. And we have like veterinarians, like in studies, like of like people's perceptions, veterinarians are regarded as like among the most trustworthy professions. And I think lawyers are down here, like right above used car salesmen. So like there's a lot that we can do there. So that's another area. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're developing a course in animals in the media.
And of course, yes, animals, law, and media. And what I'm trying to do with that course is obviously talk about animals and the law, but I think historically our movement has been a little shy about promoting all of their good work, and the tools have not been available, or we have not been trained to talk about things. That goes to the panel yesterday about storytelling. So I'm really been excited. It's been a really fun journey for me to bring in a host of specialists and experts and guests talking about documentaries and social media and photojournalism. And Jamie Berger, I know we heard from her yesterday, just learning about the power of storytelling and how we can really leverage that to hopefully, advance societal views, which in turn can advance the law. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Since we've moved to online, it's really opened up the field for more course development, which is exciting for us and also exciting for everybody, around the world who can now take online classes too. Thank you for putting me on the spot. Okay, so curriculum expansion. Let's talk about this for some of the students who may have no animal law courses or limited animal law courses. Although when we hear the number like 160 at the ABA-accredited law schools, that's very encouraging. Do you have any tips that you could share for anyone who wants to push the curriculum forward as it relates to animal law? And why don't we start with you, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're at a place where there's no animal law course, I think the administration probably wants to know three things. The first is, are students interested? Are we going to be able to fill the seats in the class? Second, why is this something that we should have our students studying? And relatedly, third, why is this the kind of thing that students get jobs in? So I think kind of thinking about all of those things and putting together a package for the administration that addresses those elements is important. So I know a lot of Student Animal Legal Defense Fund chapters have put together petitions just to sort of solicit student interest. If this course were offered, would you consider taking it? Surveys and things like that. And then just explaining why animal law is a relevant course, why it's something that should be of interest. And I think one successful way of doing that is to frame animal law almost as a bar prep course. Animal law really touches on, because animals are so pervasive in American society, they are pervasive in American law. And so in every animal law class, you're going to be talking about procedure, you're going to be talking about con law, you're going to be talking about torts, criminal law. And so kind of packaging it as if it were sort of a way of supporting students in brushing up on those course subjects, I think is a good approach.
And is there anyone here from the Animal Legal Defense Fund? Because like Matthew said, they do a wonderful job really supporting students. If there's anybody in the room who is at a law school that doesn't have an animal law course, I would really encourage you to contact them. I haven't been at ALDF since 2018, but I know they have all these great ideas. Like Matthew said, you can have a petition circulated among the student body. Would you take this class? Would you not? But you'd still support it, and really presenting the administration with a compelling argument as to why they should add it. And I know at that time they also, and I believe they still do, offer stipends for new adjunct professors, 5,000. So that can also be very persuasive. So I would encourage you to check out ALDF's website as well.
Can I just add one? Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to add one small thing. If you're trying to add an animal law course, also be creative about how you might add it. They might not want to go through the curriculum approval process of creating an animal law course because there's so much involved in that. When I taught animal law for the first time at University of Wisconsin Law School, they put it under Law and Contemporary Problems Law and Contemporary Problems was the name of like a course they had that they felt like it could fit into. So I didn't have to create like a new course because there was a space in the curriculum to add new, things like that. So just another way to approach it. Sorry, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Matthew.
No, that's a great point. The only other thing I was going to add was sort of having a sense of who you might suggest to teach it. It's probably pretty helpful because the administration has, from their perspective, better things to do than figure out who can teach a course as an adjunct. So, thinking about who the practitioners are in your region, whether there's a professor on your faculty that might be interested in doing it because they're just curious or supportive of students who have other interests. Looking inside and then looking externally to propose someone who might be able to teach it. And if they can approach the administration with a ready-made syllabus that shows they're serious, that shows the substantive course, I think all the better.
Great points. Is anyone out here at a school that doesn't have an animal law course? Oh, okay, that's
We have a lot.
disappointing. Well, then I really do encourage you to connect with ALDF. And in addition to what Matthew said, and you can connect with any of us, you know, we all have taught first-time courses. Megan mentioned I taught at University of Wisconsin. I also taught at University of Chicago for the first time. And it really is about coming to a packet with them with a packet and a persuasive argument to make them say yes and make it easy for them to say yes. But ALDF also has a list of local practitioners who possibly may be interested in teaching animal law as well. So feel free to talk with any of us about that. We really want to see less hands next year when I ask that question.
We want to see you here, regardless.
Or maybe you'll be teaching. So let's talk about the expansion of the field of animal law. And I had some more questions in there. I know that I just fast forwarded because you both did a great job of answering what I had next up for you. So how do you see the development in the field, and have you experienced it at your respective law schools, this expansion? And Matthew, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the expansion in terms of like who's interested in the course or who's taking the course has been interesting to see. I mean, I'm in my 4th year of teaching, so you know, relatively new to this experience, but you know, we do get a pretty wide variety of students. Some of them are already committed and interested in animal law, but others are just sort of curious and interested to see what the class is about. I've actually had success in people who have taken my professional responsibility class and just say, yeah, I'll take another class with Professor Liebman. So, you know, it's a pretty diverse group in terms of expanding who's.
Great. Megan, would you like to add something to that?
Sure. I loved seeing at this conference yesterday, non-animal lawyers being on the panel. So like Mary Corcoran talking about just being a criminal defense attorney and how she contributed to the success of that case, I think was huge. I also love seeing Gussie Lord doing environmental law and tribal law. And I think it's just really a testament to how the field is expanding, and we're drawing from people in other complementary fields and really kind of broadening the movement and finding ways where we can work together, even if, you know, they're not all in on animal law. That's the kind of expansion, I think, of the field that is improving outcomes for animals, education in the classroom, all of those things. So just to kind of add that piece of it.
Well, let's keep going with that a little bit. So we talked about our speakers and the professionals here, but what have been some of your challenges, if any, reaching the non-animal law students? How do we broaden that tent, get them interested, make them realize it's important, it's part of so many other disciplines? And how have you addressed those challenges? Matthew or Megan, who would like to jump in?
Go first.
Sure. I mean, you know, one challenge we have at the University of San Francisco is we have a lot of required courses. So quite a few of our like core curriculum courses are 2-semester courses. We also, because we have the hardest bar in the country, we do require some of the California bar topics, corporations, remedies, wills and trusts, community property, which are not, you know, required courses at other law schools. So there's just not a ton of space for electives. So those who take them have to be really committed. So, you know, if someone has 1 or 2 electives in their 2L year and they choose to take one of the other great classes and seminars, I don't hold that against them. I do try to sort of portray animal law as multidisciplinary, as not just sort of for people who like to watch kitten videos online. You know, there's just like so much, I think, convincing folks that there's a real substance there, that it's really interesting, that it overlaps with a ton of other practice areas is my approach. But yeah, I mean, I'll be candid. We've had lower enrollment that I would have liked to have seen in our animal law class, but the people who do show up are fantastic.
Thank you. Megan, how about you? Would you like to share what you found has motivated non-animal law students to take classes? And once they've taken the classes, is there any feedback? Is it positive, negative, neutral? Is it, I needed it at this time for 2 credits, so I took it, which is also a good way to
that's true.
bring people in.
Kind of two responses, because I've been both on the side of like a law school program that didn't have an animal law program in Wisconsin, and then being on the complete opposite of that now, being at Lewis and Clark. And so at Lewis and Clark, I think the ones that are not animal law students are really interested in the overlapping areas where we're we're working together, like habitat protection, climate change, industrial animal agriculture. A lot of those students are interested in animal law because they might want to be an environmental lawyer, but they understand all of the intersecting issues. So they're interested in animal law to kind of further the work they're already planning to do in other fields. And I think animal law is really eye-opening to those students because they've been focusing on sort of the climate change and other things, but not necessarily their impacts on the animals as individuals. So I think it really brings a different perspective, and I think that they have valued that. From the other side of it, where I've been, where there isn't an animal law program, I think sometimes people, and we should really embrace the students that just kind of come into the classroom because they're interested and curious about animal law. And I had this student at University of Wisconsin Law School who always have everybody tell, like, why are they in the class? Why did they take animal law? And he was this quiet student sitting in the back of the room, and everybody else was giving like lofty answers of why they wanted to protect animals, change the world, all that kind of stuff. And when it came to his turn, he just said, I'm going to be honest, I adore my dog Mercedes, and I felt like I owed it to her to learn about animal law. And he was such an engaged student and brought such a fresh perspective into the classroom. And I feel like as a movement, we could be more welcoming of those people, because he might not go on to be an animal lawyer. He might not go on to do animal protection work, but he might be a leader and a decision maker in an organization or in the government or policy. And that can change outcomes for animals. And I think, you know, we have to welcome the students that aren't all in and going to be animal law, you know, people and professionals, because I think it does expand people being more interested in animal law and coming into our classrooms and doing this work, or helping if they're not doing the work, but making decisions that impact the work. So
great
yeah.
answers. Have you heard from him?
I'm still Facebook friends with him.
Okay. That's the thing about teaching. You don't know until a couple of years later, you know, what people are up to. And most of the time it's very positive, as you said. So let's switch gears for a minute here. And I'm going to start with you, Matthew. And we're shifting to DEI, social justice issues here. So where do you see law education broadly and animal law curriculum specifically failing to account for how the various human, animal, and other social justice issues connect with one another?
Yeah, I'll start by acknowledging the irony of the white male on the stage talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I do think it's sort of all of our responsibilities if we're teaching courses that intersect with those topics to can address them, even if they're not ones we sort of feel authority to speak on. I think it's better than remaining silent in the classroom. So, you know, I think there is kind of an instinct to silo or subdivide within law, right? We teach civil procedure separate from torts, separate from contracts, and that makes sense. We can sort of focus on things and drill down. And so, you know, if there are courses on race in the law or gender in the law or animal law, it's fine for those to focus on the issue that they're focusing on. But I do think, you know, this idea of oppression and exclusion being mutually intersecting in ways that are worth interrogating is really important. So I don't think you would find a race in the law class in the United States that doesn't talk about the unique experience of oppression that women of color face. And so, you know, in race in the law classes, we're looking at how race intersects with gender and ability and indigeneity and you know, this idea of intersectionality, which comes from a UCLA law professor named Kimberly Crenshaw. You know, that has become part of how we think about identity categories. And you know, when I took gender in the law 20 years ago in law school, like we talked about the intersection of race and gender and ability. And so I think, you know, there's been a shift in terms of seeing those kind of public interest, you know, affinity, identity-based concepts as being mutually constitutive, as being intersecting. And I think that that's something that we can do in animal law and should do in animal law. And I do that both in my doctrinal class, but also in the seminar that I teach, which I can talk about in a little bit. But I do think, you know, so many of the important voices in animal law are people of the global majority, are people of color or women. And so kind of bringing those voices into the classroom and highlighting them is important.
Can you share examples of how you have done that with your course, Animals and Justice, the one you created and developed?
Sure, yeah. So the Animals and Justice, the seminar that I teach is, as I mentioned, sort of a theoretical kind of writing a paper class where we basically approach the question of the relationship between animals and justice through two lenses. The first is whether animals are entitled to justice. No surprise, I think they are, but we want to kind of unpack that for law students. And a lot of the students who take the class are not animal people. So I think kind of sitting with the idea of what do we mean, justice is a word that we use a lot in law, but we don't usually dig into what it means. And the concept of social justice, concepts of oppression are ones that we sort of work to give working definitions to and then try to apply them to the case of animals to think about animal rights as an issue of social justice and animal law as a justice-based struggle. And then we talk about whether what a just legal system for animals would look like. The second kind of piece of the puzzle is situating animal justice within the broader kind of anti-oppression approach. And so we look at how animality is co-constructed with race, gender, indigeneity, disability, and then we sort of look at how those tangibly intersect in specific policy areas. So we look at food justice, criminal justice, and climate justice as places where the oppression of human beings and the oppression of animals go hand in hand. But we also, and I think this is kind of the important part, is to sit with times when those interests seem to be in tension. So we do an exercise in our class modeled after a big controversy in San Francisco in the 90s concerning live animal markets in Chinatown, which were a focus of the San Francisco animal rights movement where we're based, which put it in tension with the immigrant community in Chinatown that had been there and suffered intense anti-Chinese discrimination for over a century. And sort of how do we frame those campaigns? We do like a role-playing exercise where some of the students, and I usually try to sort of swap students with what I think their personal politics are, to represent kind of the merchants in Chinatown and to represent the animal rights folks. And we read this amazing book called Dangerous Crossings by Claire Jean Kim. I really highly recommend, which kind of introduces some tools for thinking about how we might approach competing claims to justice in ways that doesn't disavow one side's struggle for justice and avowing the justice struggle that's our primary interest. And students have found that conversation to be really interesting, I think, in part because it's so local, but also because there really aren't easy answers. I want to suggest there are.
That's great. I want to take that course.
I was going to say the same thing. I'd like to take the course, Matthew.
Do you want to expand a little bit about how the students have reacted? I mean, I just would love to hear more about that, as this is something that we're all experiencing a little bit more as we expand our curriculum.
Yeah, I think I will say, and I've taught this seminar 3 times, and the enrollment has fluctuated quite a bit, so it's difficult to kind of generalize. I have had a majority of the students, like the second year that I taught it, it was a lot of students who are not interested in animal issues to begin with, but I think approaching it through this kind of the lens of intersectionality, of total liberation, was one that I think spoke to them more than just sort of a strictly animal rights-based approach. So I think it's been generally well received, and the conversations are great. I mean, having conversations on these topics in law schools, I know, is really difficult and challenging, but we try to, on the first day of class, we talk about kind of creating a communication contract so that we can sort of talk about ideas in ways that are non-judgmental, that are open, and kind of acknowledging that we're probably going to screw up, but that's part of having difficult conversations.
Wonderful, thank you. Would you like to add anything before I shift gears a little bit?
Sure. Just briefly, I think that in our animal law classes, we can bring in human experiences, even if it's not just, in a particular course that's designed to do that. So like in companion animal law, we focus on a couple of the modules on domestic violence and animal cruelty, and that's an area of passion for me. And I try to call upon the students to not just consider the experiences of the animals, but to consider the experience of victims of domestic abuse, and in particular, the additional barriers that victims have, depending if they're BIPOC, if there are immigration issues, gender identity, sexual orientation, all of these things that can impact their experience. And then it translates into impacting what the animal's experience is, also being a victim of violence in that household. So we can bring it into all kinds of different areas of animal law fundamentals, companion animal law. That's just one example.
Thank you.
And I do try to bring that into the doctrinal class as well. Like we start off the class thinking about like, what are the theoretical frameworks for thinking about our moral obligations to animals and how do we translate those into legal obligations? And of course, we talk about Peter Singer and Tom Reagan and Gary Francione, but we also talk about Carol Adams and Joseph Donovan and Martha Nussbaum, Angela Harris. We read her, Should People of Color Support Animal Rights? So I think kind of setting the table at the beginning of a semester, like these are ways of thinking about our relationship with animals and keeping that kind of diverse, multi-perspectival is a good way to kind of keep it throughout a course where, you know, we're going to be focusing on animal issues, but how we think about those animal issues bring in other questions as well.
Thank you. So let's talk about collaboration. And as we talk about expanding animal law for the benefit of animals and everyone and the legal education, collaboration is so critical, key, it's important. You know, this is something we absolutely have to do and consider if we want to expand this field. So Miga, could you tell us a little bit about collaborations on the academic front at the Center for Animal Law Studies, share your experience with that, and then I can pass it over to you, Matthew, as well.
Sure, just to underscore, I mean, collaboration is so important to us, expanding the movement and achieving good outcomes. And we've done it in a variety of ways internally at the Center for Animal Law Studies and at Lewis and Clark, and externally. Starting with internally, we have collaborated with our business law program. So the Center for Business Law and Innovation, we had a great collaboration with them a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, where we did a day-long symposium on food law. And it was such a cool opportunity to work with colleagues we don't normally work with, but also to bring in their business expertise and perspectives into a conversation about developing a resilient food system. So that was one cool example of that. Another is 3 years ago, we started an official collaboration with our environmental law program. And so we co-created the Global Law Alliance for Animals and the Environment. And that is kind of like it's a clinic essentially, but they go out and use international tools to protect both animals and the environment. And they have those two clinics that I talked about earlier relating to international wildlife law. And then externally, we do lots of different collaborations. One historical one we had was the National Animal Law Competitions, where we collaborated with Harvard Law School and ALDF for about 12 years to offer that competition. And then it was dormant for a while. And thanks to the Brooks Institute, that has been resurrected. And now we are working on it with the Brooks Institute. And I think USF is involved, and Denver and Vermont and Yale. So just an opportunity to bring lots of different programs together to collaborate and work on animal law issues. And then just one international one, because I know we're short on time, is we collaborated with several international law schools. So University of Kent in the UK and Marseille in France and University of Timișoara in Romania. And we did a postgraduate workshop in comparative animal law in the spring. And it was just such a cool opportunity for MSL, LLM, and PhD students to focus on animal law. And we really had broad draw. There was students from Germany and Spain and Sri Lanka and Peru and Australia and Finland and the US that all participated in that. So that was a real like crash course in some collaboration, but wanted to get it in on time.
Thank you. Would you like to share your
Sure.
of collaboration?
Yeah, I'll give one internal example and one external. So we have a Center for Contemplative Law in Education at the University of San Francisco that's led by Rhonda McGee, who is an expert on mindfulness and race in the law. And so I'm part of that organization, and just through our working together, Professor McGee has decided to make all of their events vegan by default, not by like everything vegan. So, you know, just great opportunity to sort of work with like-minded folks. Externally, we co-sponsored or co-hosted a symposium on the use of restorative and transformative models of justice in criminal animal law cases with Vermont Law School last summer, which was a really great opportunity to have conversations about how we might do criminal law.
I love it. And I got a 5-minute warning, so I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions and everyone to give the updates that they'd like to give. Can we end on international collaborations? What your thoughts are as we, again, harken back to the steps to expand the animal law movement. Talk about the global front and any updates on that. And why don't we start with you, Megan?
Sure. I think that just bringing international perspectives into the classroom is so important. And we're a little spoiled. At Lewis and Clark, we have so many wonderful international students who are in the classrooms. And I see some of our fabulous alumni here. But bringing in guest speakers and international perspectives into the classroom, really helping to show where in the United States we can be doing a better job, because we tend to think we have a pretty good situation here, but there's so much we can learn from other systems. And then also having people in the classroom to share that type of perspective we had, it really brings things, I think, kind of into focus. We had a student in our online animal law LLM program during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and she was a Ukrainian student living through that, and then brought that perspective into the classroom. And when we did a hot topic in companion animal law, which was their final project in the course, that student presented on the impacts of war on animals. And it was so impactful to have somebody going through that, doing on-the-ground rescue of the companion animals in Ukraine at the time, and then translating it into how the law fails animals when we have human, caused war and how it impacts their lives. Really, I just think improved the academic experience of all the students. So bring it into your classroom in whichever way you can is sort of the short answer. Matthew.
Yeah, and we do in my basic doctrinal animal law class, we do comparative animal law presentations. So I have the students pick one topic that we've studied the domestic law on and pick any country they want, and then see how that country regulates that area of animal use and draw conclusions about kind of what that might reflect about cultural differences or ethical differences, priorities. And I think it's really a good way to, most of the class is domestic animal law, but it is nice to think about how other folks do things differently and what that might mean for how we do those things. And I think it can sort of spark imagination about how animal law in the United States could be different.
Wonderful. Thank you both. You're off the hot seat for a minute here. I'm going to open it up for questions online and in person. We have a microphone. It looks right there. So if anyone has questions and would like to come up and ask questions to our panelists or provide any updates in your world on animal law, education, expansion, and innovation, I welcome you up to the mic.
Thank you for this panel. It was really helpful for me as a law student going to a school that doesn't offer an animal law class. I really appreciated the 1, 2, 3 on like how to get a course offered. And I was wondering if you had any advice on clinics, getting an animal law clinic started.
Yeah. Clinics are tricky, and you all have a clinic, so I will defer to you. We don't have a clinic. It is a expensive proposition. It's basically running a law firm, which is a heavy lift, and making sure that there is sufficient student interest. There's someone who can manage the docket while the students are away. Thinking about projects that are both impactful and pedagogical is really a challenge. So I don't know, I don't have advice on how to get a clinic. I just know what the challenges are.
Well, I'll add it's much like encouraging an administration to add a course. It's same thing, working with the student body, petitioning the administration, showing what the value is. I don't know, Megan, if you want to speak to it at all, but to echo what Matthew said, it's a little bit more complicated than having an animal law adjunct person come in, which doesn't have to go through such a rigorous approval process.
Yeah, I don't have anything much to add other than I agree with all of those. And it is a heavy lift. It's an important lift if you can get there, but you really have to think through what are the objectives of the clinic. How are you going to accomplish it? How are you going to fund it? Who's it going to serve? How's it going to help animals? It's a lot more involved than just adding a class. So an alternative to adding a clinic is looking for ways to bring experiential opportunities into the classroom, short of going, full on into a clinic. There are lots of ways that you can do that without actually having a clinic.
Initiatives, there's very specific terms and language and things that we can call within the institution. So yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. My name is Gladys. I come from Uganda and I have a privilege of heading the Uganda Wildlife Court currently. Okay. My name is Gladys. I come from Uganda. I have the privilege of heading the Uganda Wildlife Court currently. And as far as I know, I am the second Ugandan to do the LLM in animal law. And as we all are aware, perhaps we all know that the different countries have different prevailing situations and our interests are different. So animal law is not so easy to introduce where we come from, especially talking from my experience with Uganda. I have tried some universities and the reception hasn't been very good, especially for public universities where the curriculums there are older than me. So it's very difficult to change a thing and to convince people there that animal law is important at all. So those are hurdles that we are going through. But talking from Uganda, I know that there are some stuff they're interested in, for example, wildlife, and that's why we have the only specialized wildlife court perhaps in Africa. And for me, I choose to take that approach of, say, teaching wildlife law. I am sure we may not specifically need to change the curriculum, but if some universities will be interested, maybe like Megan said, they could allow to have maybe a subject of wildlife law under a big subject, maybe a topic. Perhaps it could come as a topic to a subject. Maybe later we can have animal law introduced. But then I need support to put together the curriculum, the subject content, and all of us here who really would want to stand with me in this one. One thing is that I'm sure, knowing who I am today in my country, many universities will be willing to listen and to open doors, but I need to go there when I have good content. I can convince them on why we need this to be taught in schools and how we are going to teach it. Support is all I need. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. And we have a question from a virtual audience member. Liberty, would you like to go ahead and ask it?
Yes, thank you. So this is from Deborah, who's joining us online from South America, and she had the opportunity to take Megan's Companion Animal Summer Course in 2020. And she says because of COVID-19, the course was offered online and it was a really fantastic experience. And she's wondering if there's a possibility that there'll be more online courses for international students and professors in the future.
That's a great question. So we do currently have, and we expanded into this actually right after the pandemic, an online advanced degree program. So in the space of both LLM students and non-lawyer students who can get an MSL degree, we have a full program that's now offered, a 27 credit animal law program offered fully online. And interestingly, from a teaching perspective, it's also fully asynchronous because we are working against different time zones and whatnot. So that's a different teaching experience as well. So there is that opportunity currently, and there may be other things that we would offer in the future. So yeah, thank you, Deborah. I remember Deborah.
Do you have any more questions over there? Any questions from our audience or comments or updates? Hello.
Hello. I actually have a similar question to Gladys. Actually, I'm also an LLM student from Pakistan, and hopefully I'll be teaching animal law there next year. And so I actually wanted to ask a question about, like you mentioned, you know, when you started this whole thing, and so I'm like overthinking a lot. But there's also this burden, you know, make sure that the course is very well received and there's an opportunity that it continues after. So because this will only just be the second one in my country. So just want to know how it all started here. Like, you know, go back to the beginning, any advice? And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe there one of you want to answer.
Yeah, I think creating a course is a challenge. I mean, it's something that I faced when I started. There's a lot of resources that are available. I mean, I think you're creating, has animal law been, you said it's the second course in Pakistan?
Yeah, the course has been submitted. I'm just in the final stages of getting, like, actually teaching. So the problem, like, it's not a problem. I just want to know, like, what things should I, you know, be worried about, because it's my first time teaching animal law.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a very iterative process. So you learn as you go, you figure out what works and what didn't, make sure you're covering the stuff that's important to you and to your students, and to the place where you're teaching. And you know, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time out. Mine certainly wasn't, still not perfect the fourth time out, and I'm sure never will be, but it is a process of learning and growing and adapting.
I would also kind of say, tailor it to where you are. You know, Gladys talking about in Uganda, if people are interested in wildlife law, you just did the compendium as our global ambassador on wildlife laws in Uganda. So start there and develop people that are interested in it and expand as people, you know, as people kind of tend to come into the field, learn about a particular issue. Maybe it's companion animal law. And then they think about, boy, you know, I don't know why I care this deeply about my dog, but I've never considered a pig. And, you know, same thing for you, Altamash, in Pakistan. Meet kind of where the interest is, develop it that way, and then you can always expand from it. It doesn't have to be a full, you know, animal law fundamentals is a wonderful thing to be able to teach, but if your opportunity is to teach a smaller niche area of animal law and that gets you in the door and then you can do more, go for it. You know, whatever you can do to meet people where their interest is, in my perspective anyway.
And I'll just add too, there are resources out there, and to harken back to the Animal Legal Defense Fund, there is an animal law professor listserv. Once you are teaching, there are wonderful resources there with curriculum, sample syllabi, exams, quizzes, and there's a new resource that I just texted Raj and asked him if he'd come up here and talk about.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we could talk about it yet. Raj, so go for it.
And Raj, this is the last question, so make it brilliant.
So actually, I mostly had a comment actually, and it was just noting that a lot of law schools, like if you're interested in teaching and being a professor, just touching upon some of the points that Matthew made. I know it's true at Lewis and Clark. There's a course called Street Law, and you can go into a high school classroom and teach on a subject of particular interest to you. And so, you know, animal law education, animal ethics, I think are valuable courses within sort of the law school, but these are a lot of things that I think could be really valuable for high school and other students, and there are opportunities for that. And if you're looking for sort of clinical opportunities and it just doesn't seem to be something that would potentially make sense for your law school at this moment in time, there are externship opportunities. And I don't know if any one of you would want to speak to those prospects and options at your institution. So
I think you have an announcement.
Yeah, I was also just going to add, we're actually hosting an animal legal pedagogy workshop at the University of San Francisco in April 6th. So we'll be sending out the announcement. We sent out a save the date, but in case folks didn't see it, it's going to be an opportunity for folks who are interested in teaching animal law and folks who have been teaching animal law to come together, talk about formative assessment, how to write an exam, multiple choice questions, syllabus drafting, just really kind of a get together to talk about all of the conversations I wish I had had the opportunity to have before I was thrown into a classroom.
Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Just that we'll also be having an animal law education summit next fall. So stay tuned for more information on that, but it'll be an opportunity to workshop some papers, also talk about pedagogy, and it'll be next October. So more information on that in the future.
Okay, well, thank you all for sticking with us to the end here. It's been a wonderful 3 days. I'd like to thank our sponsors. First of all, thank you to the Carroll House Furniture, our platinum sponsor, the Brooks Institute of Animal Rights, Law and Policy, and our gold sponsors, the Stray Dog Institute and Beyond Meat.